I'm not sure where this is going to go. Am I going to work in a zoo? Probably not. Am I going to work in a laboratory or teach people? Having to take something that was complex and make it simple for farmers or people in a sales team to be able to find what they were looking for. I think curiosity is definitely one of those key things. But I think even the way that I've been able to transverse between different industries as well as through different retailers is that it's all about being human and customer centric. This is how much revenue or cost we have delivered, saved within that period of time, and constantly making sure that I could keep the team employed. I think the interesting thing for me, I feel that so much of the barriers that we have in our life, a lot of the time we've actually put them there ourselves.
Welcome back to Business Unbound, where we dive into conversations with visionary leaders from every corner of the globe to bring you insights, inspiration, and the real stories behind success. I'm your host, Florian Hoff. Today, I'm joined by Nicola Clement. Nicola is currently ranked number 3 in Australia's top 50 e-commerce leaders and has just completed her executive MBA degree at the University of Oxford. But her journey to the C-suite wasn't always linear. Early in her career, she was the person sent to go figure out this thing called internet, and she turned that into opportunity into pioneering digital journeys, from building early websites and running 2-cent Google ads to launching major online platforms. Since then, Nicola has led digital and e-commerce transformations across industries, including leading transformation at an airline, scaling a clothing brand's online presence, and most recently, serving as Chief Experience Officer at a beauty retailer. It's fair to say that Nicola has navigated every twist and turn that modern retail can throw at you. Nicola's experience includes taking the online business of Myers, an Australian department store, from roughly 250 million to over 800 million in just a few years, and helping a company called Adore Beauty move from pure online to physical retail stores. What makes Nicola's story unique from my perspective isn't just her track record, it's her philosophy. As a self-proclaimed profitability evangelist, she's built a reputation for showing businesses how putting customers and employees first actually creates the most sustainable shareholder value. In today's conversation, we are diving deep into why businesses that plan for decades, not quarters, build the most sustainable competitive advantages. We will explore how a human-centered approach can turn businesses not just ethical, but also into a strategically beneficial direction. And Nicola will share the honest truth about building a nonlinear career in an industry that's constantly evolving. If you're an entrepreneur, executive, or anyone thinking about their next decade rather than their next promotion, this conversation will give you frameworks for thinking bigger and planning smarter. This is Business Unbound. Let's dive in. Quick moment of honesty. Business Unbound is brand new. We are in the early days of something that I genuinely believe in, a show dedicated to real conversations with forward-thinking business leaders and inspiring individuals who are having a real impact on this world. And that's where you come in. I need your help. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast app, follow the show and leave a rating. It sounds simple, but it shows that this content matters and it directly impacts how many ambitious professionals like you discover these conversations. When you're helping me, you're not just supporting a show. Instead, here's what you're really doing. You're saying that quality business conversations deserve a platform. You're saying substance matters over hype, and you're saying this mission is worth building. So if this resonates with you, help me reach others like you. Subscribe, follow, share, whatever works for wherever you are. You're helping build something substantial from the ground up, and I genuinely appreciate it. So thank you. And now back to the show. Nicola Clement, welcome to Business Unbound.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Nicola, your career is fascinating, but let's start from the beginning. Can you take us back and tell us how your career unfolded?
I mean, it's a bit of a curly story. My actual undergraduate degree is in zoology. I minored in biology and geology. I was pretty much told from school to go and do whatever I was good at. And we were a traditional math, science, and English school. I always got good grades. So I went and studied what was interesting. However, at the end of my second year, I was kind of like, I'm not sure where this is going to go. Am I going to work in a zoo? Probably not. Am I going to work in a laboratory or teach people? And I'm like, I talk too much to work in a laboratory. So I'd actually been working in wineries because I come from a small
Nice.
wine region in the top of the South Island of New Zealand. And I'd been working with the marketing manager. And I loved what she was doing. And I had a bit of a conversation with her around how she got into her job. And I managed to do a 1 year postgrad in marketing and management. And that was my foray into a world that I'd never really spent much time in, but it made so much sense to me. And I was lucky enough to then get my first job working
Mhm.
for an agricultural chemical company in the marketing department. So I had this wonderful role that allowed me to tap into my scientific knowledge where I was working with the research teams, helping them get new labeling requirements and getting it through government departments, being able to then communicate that with sales teams and then with farmers. So taking something highly technical and being able to work it back to something that a layperson could understand. So my first job outside of university was the ability to be able to bring my science background and marketing together. I was working in the marketing team for an agricultural chemical company, and my boss, the marketing manager, said, "Oh, IT is doing something called the internet. Can you go down and find out what they want from marketing?" Like, yeah, sure, no problems. And that's how I got into digital.
So when your boss sent you to the IT guys to figure out this thing called internet, what happened next?
To be honest, nobody really knew what was going on. It was a fascinating time. We're talking about mid 2001. And
Mhm.
the company was after was a way to be able to, they weren't even selling at that stage. All they needed to do was to be able to share information. We're talking about a chemical company that required people to be able to download what they call material safety data sheets. So,
Mhm.
really, it was an online library, but then being able to build it and structure data and information in a way that made it easy for people to find what they wanted. So, it was a fantastic exercise of thinking about psychology, organization, and design, and from the outset, having to take something that was complex and make it simple for farmers or people in a sales team to be able to find what they were looking for quickly, especially if there was an emergency. So I got free reign basically to go and come back with a concept around how I would do this. And that's kind of where I fell in love with it because for me, it was left brain and right brain. I was using my science background and that
Mhm.
sort of hypothesis way of thinking, as in, what is the problem? How might I solve this? Getting to send it live and figure out if it worked. And then I got to analyze the data and see how customers responded to that, talk to them, get feedback, and try it all over again. And that's kind of how I fell into online. And I've loved it ever since.
Hmm. And you eventually ended up at the intersection between commerce, retail, technology. From your early career to this, I would say, career pivot, how did this come about?
It's almost didn't feel so much like a pivot as an evolution, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Because after I finished up at the agricultural chemical company, I went to work for an SAP professional services consulting company where I ran the intranet as well as the website and did a traditional marketing job. It was really interesting, actually, though, looking at a company that needed to sell technology, both at an enterprise level, writing, $1 million pitches to businesses to be able to offer professional services. We were the first to roll out Windows XP in New Zealand to some of these companies. And we were actually the first company in New Zealand to have Blackberries, which I actually did an assignment on and looked at the adoption of technology. That was actually the first time I attempted my MBA. But I
Okay.
was really not in a job where I could apply those learnings. I then went overseas and went to the UK for 2 years on my working holiday. We call it an
Mhm.
OE in New Zealand, your overseas experience. But again, I found myself working in financial services and health insurance, where technology became very much a key enabler of what was being done. But we were one of the first companies in the UK to actually externalize a CRM through web forms. Back in the day, you used to put a web form on a website, it would sync to an email, and then somebody would manually print out that email and type it into the back end of CRM or an ERP. We were one of the first companies to actually connect a live web form back to a CRM system from a health insurance perspective, and then allow claims to start to go straight into the back end and also new customers to sign up. So I think all of those sorts of opportunities that I had
Mhm.
started to blend that way of me thinking about how can you think about technology differently. So even if we talk about conversion rate optimization, which a number of your listeners may have heard of, back in 2006 when I worked in the UK, nothing like that existed. There was no um, concept of a technology that would do that for you, but we were trying to prove the value of the new booking flow that I wanted to build for the website. And I was like, well, why can't you just split the traffic on the server? Can't you just, I know that you can intercept it when the website goes down and you can shift traffic to another
Mhm.
server, like in case as a backover or failover, just to say the website's down notification. So why can't you do that for me? And they go, oh, we can. So then it was just about asking questions, being curious, understanding enough to be dangerous, I say, and then challenging when somebody says no. There's actually not ever an answer, which is it can't be done. It might just be that somebody hasn't thought about it before or hasn't thought about it in a different way. And that curiosity, that ability to be able to think slightly differently and come at it from different directions until I could find a yes or a gray area that I could get around, that was where I was starting to go, I can start to use technology to to help me deliver the outcomes that I am looking for. But you've got to find the right people who are happy to play in that space of curiosity with you. That was the main thing. Technology in itself, for me, is not actually the enabler. And this is again where we come to with AI. We can get to that later in the chat as well. But it is the intersection of humans and technology that actually drives those outcomes. So when I then fell into retail, it was just a whole other world of taking technology and figuring out how to solve customer problems, but with fun humans and stay curious.
That is a powerful lesson, I would say, right? To not take no for an answer and to accept that other people may not have thought about it, or maybe they think it's hard and they don't want to do it. But if you can argue and make a clear business case out of this, then do not accept no for an answer.
Well, we always talk about the fact that nothing is impossible with technology. It's just a
Mhm.
matter of how long, how much, um, and how many people, or what else are you going to stop? There's always a conversation. We've never really come across anything that can't be done.
Mm. Nicola, let's narrow down our conversation a little bit more to your retail and e-commerce experience. I understand from looking at your background that in your career, you worked at very different retail and commerce sectors. There was outdoor gear at Kathmandu. There was aviation at Jetstar. There was fashion, for example, at Forever New. There was beauty at Adore Beauty. What's been the common thread that allowed you to successfully navigate such diverse retail and commerce industries?
I think curiosity is definitely one of those key things. But I think even the way that I've been able to transverse between different industries as well as through different retailers is
Hmm.
that it's all about being human and customer centric. Because even working at a number of fashion brands, for example, or even take the department store where you've got so many different categories underneath one major brand, those customers behave differently at every company I've ever worked for. There are some base human behaviors, which I think are, typical and transferable across anything that you work in. but how they actually respond to your brand, your product range, how price sensitive they are, what their value drivers are, all of those things are different. And so coming in with that mindset of being curious, being open to listen, not trying to project your own feelings and opinions onto that customer base or even onto your employees, I think is really key. Your employees are the ones that are closest to your customers.
Mhm.
So actually listening to them and listening to and giving channels for your customers to give you that feedback is so very, very important. Because as long as you've got those input channels and then you know where your problems are, that's how you can decide where you spend your time and effort.
Right. And in one of your most recent roles, I believe, you were a general manager at Myers, an Australian department store. We heard in the introduction to this episode that you managed to increase online revenues to about 800 million annually. For our audience members, can you just explain what this role entailed for you in your day-to-day doing? What were you responsible for?
Sure. So I was general manager of Omni Experience and e-commerce. So
Mhm.
Omni Experience for retail is all of the customer touch points across all of the shopping experiences. So whether or not it's online and then how it translates in store, we're talking about things like click and collect, find stock in store, price checks, any kind of using technology in store, an app, and then through the online experience emails, post purchase experience, that whole end to end piece. So my job was primarily to connect all those teams with the customer in mind. So even from how do you go from awareness right through to consideration and purchase, how are those connecting across teams and making sure that the customer has the right information at the right time to be able to make the action that they want to in the channel that they want to. There should never be a way that we are forcing you to purchase or
Mhm.
communicate with us in a particular channel, but getting the technology and the experience to align across teams in a 10,000 plus size business is really complex. So we would lead very much from data, whether or not that is like analytical data from the website, if it was customer verbatims, it was feedback from the app store, all of those touch points. We would synthesize all of that down, understand where the customer pain points were, understand where we were potentially hemorrhaging money.
Mhm.
So what was their opportunity to increase our customer satisfaction and make more money and bring that together into a roadmap that we sold into the business and then funded to be able to deliver those key things. But in the same respect, I also ran the day to day of everything to do on the website, whether it's content, the promotions, where products go, how search works, I kept that entire channel running. So that was about 75 people in my
Uh-huh.
direct team, but I probably had another nearly 100 people that I funded through my business case through IT that delivered a lot of the work that my team led.
Right. That sounds very, very complex, but at the same time, very interesting that you had visibility and responsibility over so many different yet interconnected moving pieces.
Yes.
And still, you eventually made the decision to step away from your role to pursue an executive MBA degree at the University of Oxford. And I'm wondering why? Why
Oh,
did you do that?
there's a few things. I think one of the key things to recognize is timing. So I started at Myer in 2018.
Uh-huh.
Oh, sorry, no, 2019. So I was probably just coming up a year into the job when COVID hit. My previous boss, he had finished up and left us in January. So I got a new boss who'd never looked after online before. And we were finding our feet together. And all of a sudden, here comes COVID. Well, I'm great in a crisis and I know what to do. So that was really helpful for me to be able to step in and take control and really make sure that we focused on the things that mattered. But some of the challenges that came through that was that my team
Mhm.
and some of my others bosses reports, we were some of the only part of the business that was actually working. So we I personally felt the responsibility of nearly 10,000 people's jobs sitting on my team's shoulders. We had
Uh,
been roughly 12% of the business before COVID, and we needed to be able to keep the doors open. So I needed to write a business case for the CFO, the CIO, and my boss, the chief customer officer, once a month to say, this is what we're doing, this is what we've done, this is what we're going to do next, and this is how much revenue or cost we have delivered, saved within that period of time, and constantly making sure that I could keep the team employed. Now, that was then helpful because the work that we were doing gave them the confidence to be able to open up the stores for click and collect and be able to keep getting orders out of the business. And we were able to then continue to still keep the business afloat, which was amazing. But what I would say though, the responsibility, as well as then working 7 days a week, every time that we had a press release saying, because we've got 7 different states in Australia, each with their own premier who made their own decisions around what happened in COVID. So Western Australia, 3 hours behind us, would be like 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. We're going into lockdown tomorrow. That's 11 o'clock for us over in the Eastern Seaboard. And I need to get the agency up. I need to get my team up. We've then got to update the website. We've got to change a whole lot of configs in the background, push it out again. So we were constantly living in a state of adrenaline, which we only usually get when around what we call peak trading period, which is kind of like from November through to January as you go through, Cyber Weekend or your Black Fridays, those kind of events and into Boxing Day. But we kind of lived in that state, that heightened state of adrenaline and always on. And then for me personally, that level of responsibility, I'm carrying that for about 2 years. And one of the things that I was sitting there on some of those days when you have to take a moment and go, how do I keep going? One of the key things I said was like, well, when this is over, what do I want to do? Where would I rather be if I wasn't here right now? And one of the things that came up for me was the fact that I'd attempted to do my MBA twice before. Once when I was 24 and I was the youngest by 10 years in the class. And I did an amazing assignment and got fantastic grades, but I didn't feel like I had to roll all the worldly experience to be able to get the most out of the course. The second time was 2009, and I'd done 2 weeks into the course, and I got made redundant during the global financial crisis. And that's when
uh,
I moved to Australia again. And interestingly, that's how I fell into retail. So I'm so grateful for that. I look back now because that then gave me the opportunity to go, well, actually, if I'm going to give this a red hot crack, if I'm actually going to go and do this, if I could do it anywhere in the world, where would it be? Well, of course, I go to Oxford. I'm like, I can't get into Oxford. Well, it's a silly little dream from a girl from a small town of 20,000 people in the South Island, New Zealand. Why on earth would she think she'd go to Oxford? And I went, you know what? You don't know if you don't try. So I literally smashed myself for 3 days. I did all of the essays, the assessments, everything I needed to get done. And I went, you know what? I have left nothing on the table for this. I've put it all out there. And if I don't get in, cool. I'll figure out a plan B then. And then I was so amazed and grateful to realize that I got it in, but I also got a 50% scholarship. And I'm like, this is me. And for me, as soon as I got that confirmation email, there was no question I was doing it. There was nothing that I wanted more than actually to be able to give myself the gift of taking a break and actually going back to learn. When I actually reflect on the fact that I had spent so much of my career
uh.
teaching, investing, being at that forefront of having to learn everything myself on the job because there was nobody to teach me about digital back in 2001. So the ability to actually invest in me for a change, best thing I ever did.
I have to ask a follow-up question here. So you said that it took you only 3 days to get into the executive MBA program at the University of Oxford.
Yes, I don't think I've actually ever told anyone that. Um, yes, but I'll hype myself up on caffeine and sugar, and I've got a bit of ADHD, so this hyper focused, just smashed it out.
But what's your, let's on a serious note, what's your, I mean, secret sauce? What can our audience members take away from this dedication, this mindset that you applied to get in only 3 days?
Look, I think The interesting thing for me, I feel that so much of the barriers that we have in our life, a lot of the time we've actually put them there ourselves. Because when I stop to actually think about it, it doesn't matter that I came from a town of 20,000 people. It doesn't matter that I come from a small town on the South Island of New Zealand, literally the opposite side of the world to Oxford. The thing is that I had as much opportunity as anybody else applying for it. And it's a little bit like they say in the lotto, right? You can't win if you're not in the race. So actually taking a punt on myself and putting myself out there, that's at least one way to know. I would rather know than sit here wondering, what if? So I think that's one thing that I've really taken away is that if I find myself having a dream, then I would much rather try and see, can I make that dream a reality than just
Uh-huh.
sit go, you know what, I had a great idea, or I thought maybe I could have done this. I think that is where we actually do ourselves a service living in the what ifs when we had the time and ability to be able to potentially make it a reality. And even if I hadn't made it to Oxford, like once I got that kind of buzz and I thought that actually that could be a reality, there would have been other places that I could have then thought about going that didn't require me staying in Melbourne. But I'm so glad I got to go to Oxford and got to meet you.
You and I, we obviously we met at the University of Oxford. That's how we know each other. And what you just explained reminds me of something that really stuck with me. In our very first class with James Taylor, he used to have some citations on many of his slides that he was showing in class. And the one that stuck with me was there was a quote saying, "Opportunity dances with those on the dance floor." And what you just explained for me is exactly this quote, full stop.
Yes, completely. I love that. I thought about that moment. I think I need to print that up and put it on my wall.
Nicola, let's dive further into one of our main themes today, long-term versus short-term business planning. And you've seen this tension firsthand across multiple organizations. And when businesses focus only on quarterly results, from your perspective, what are they missing? Like, what's the real cost of short-termism versus thinking long-term?
I think the interesting thing for me is that real fundamental change, whether or not we're talking system level change, political change, organizational change, you can't deliver that in a quarter. Not change that will actually stick, change that will um, last beyond the leader who is the one inspiring that change. And that's where I feel like if you're leading quarter to quarter and you are constantly led by vanity metrics, ones that are very much short term, then you never actually get to shift the dial. If we're talking any kind of transformation projects, and I have a bit of a bugbear about using the word digital transformation, I believe far more in business transformation because it is far broader. A lot of people who start to talk about digital get a little bit hung up on the technology. But when we really want to be able to deliver fundamental business change, it starts with people, then it's process, and then it leads into technology. But those kind of programs are always at least 3 to 5 years. So, how can we really think that operating quarter to quarter is fundamentally going to lead to change? I appreciate that there's always going to be a bit of a need for businesses to be able to balance these things. But realistically, the ones that are chasing those quarterly targets tend to be the ones that are listed. I spent a lot of my career
Mm.
working in businesses, but one of the first times that I started to cotton on to this was I was working for a telecommunications company owned out of Australia, but I was based in New Zealand. And I realized that the CEO of the New Zealand branch of the business only had a contract for 3 years. And I'm like, what's going on here? This feels far more like a political system where the prime minister's only in power for 3 years. And then the things that he was able to sign off on, the things that he was wanting to prioritize and drive for his tenure and what would go on his CV, they were what were coming to the forefront, not what was best for the business, not what was best for the company being here in 10, 20, 50 years, not for a company who is take the department store in Australia, it's been around for over 100 years, that is a stalwart of
Mm.
um, employment and actually used to be a foundation for certain towns in Australia that actually held that town together because they employed so many people and then also supported a number of the farming and small communities around those towns. And I think that there's an interesting concept here around responsibility in some respects for business or commerce and the role that it plays in our wider society for how those sort of, we did our systems thinking course. And I start to think about the role that commerce plays in keeping people employed, that then allows people to pay their taxes, that pays for your healthcare, and all of those things that come from there. And if we are very short term focused and we are not thinking about how is this business sustainable and going to be here and providing value and jobs and an economy in 50 years' time, then where are we going and what are we doing?
Mhm. And these perspectives, they are radically different, right? Thinking quarter to quarter and thinking more short term versus thinking about the next 10, 20, or as you mentioned, even 50 years. That's a radical time frame for most businesses and for most business planning. So can you give us a practical example of what a 10, 20, or even 50-year timeline looks like in retail or technology?
Yeah, well, I think some of those decisions, you're not going to be able to realistically predict what is the business going to look like in 50 years. For me, it's part of an ethos around we want to be here in 50 years. We may not look the same, but if we
Mm.
look at some of those businesses that have lasted the test of time, well, then what is some of the things that we can look at and draw inspiration from them? I'm going to sort of deviate a little bit to actually how I approach some of my career coaching because it actually has a very similar perspective for me, which is that I get people to think about the horizon. Like when you are walking towards a horizon, it's you get a little bit of that halo wobbly effect. There's a bit of mirage, but it's hard to see, but it's off in the distance. You know where it is, and you go, that's where we're going. I can't see it clearly, but I know where I'm headed. And what you tend to find is like when people are short term focused, or particularly like quarter to quarter focus, it's almost like they're constantly looking at your feet. So, you're going to be looking for the small um, rocks in the way, the things that you might trip on, the tree root or something like that. But you're really focused on what's right in front of you. You don't see the mountain, you don't see the hills, you don't see the rivers. So you're not preparing for those kind of things. So you're not then thinking while you're on the way that, hey, I might want to pick up that ladder because it's going to help me get across that bridge. You're not thinking about either the skills that you need to gain. You're not thinking about the changing your route slightly because you need to go around an obstacle, anything like that, because you're always looking down at your feet. And I think that you can never truly get to where you want to go in the long run if all you're doing is looking at your feet.
Mm. And from a pure business perspective, I mean, balancing this tension, there are day-to-day demands. I think you know this just as good as anyone who has an exposed position in business. You just explained, okay, on Sunday evening, 11 p.m., you were working on something that was due for the next morning. And yet it is important to have a vision and to align people behind you. So as a leader, how do you strike this balance?
Well, I think it is really important because a lot of people don't work with urgency if they're thinking about a 50-year timeline. For me, the 50-year timeline is all about inspiration, alignment, and keeping people aligned to a bigger purpose so that they can understand the role that they play and where they're going. But I agree, you've got to be able to balance that with the we're still going to be able to make a profit and we've still got to be in business next year as well as in the next 50. I think the important part there is again, making sure people understand that what we are delivering today does still ladder up to what we're trying to achieve in the long term, and make sure that the people understand that what is being done today delivers that. But when it comes to balancing that effort and energy, one of the things that I do tend to see is that, again, ego or the person gets in the way of some of that
Mm.
greater good. They think about what are the things that will end up on my CV, what are the things that I'm going to talk about that I've delivered. And that is where you can get into some conflict, because people then try to push harder. They tend to overextend either people, or they set the targets too high so that
Mhm.
their business looks like it's failing in the short term, where actually that would mean if they continue to deliver those kind of increments over the next 10, 20, or 50 years, that they would far exceed the goals that they need to do. So for me, it's about sustainable. You can't run a marathon at a sprinting pace. So if you are in a business where you're a startup and your goal is to exit in 3 years, cool, no worries, sprint, because you are clear on what your goal and vision is. But if you are building a business that you want to become a family legacy, or you want to build it into a listed company that is here in 50 years, that is a different approach. And I think it is really important to be clear as a business, what is your purpose and what are you trying to do? And then how are you incentivizing and making clear to the people who are choosing to work in that business that this is what it's like, this is what we're doing, and this is what we're here to achieve. Because if the people who are coming into a business that is a startup with a 3-year view to exit, and they know that they are going to come and they are going to sprint for 3 years and they are going to get rewarded for it, cool. Upfront, they get to make that decision for themselves. You go and take a 110-year-old department store who
Mhm.
it's got a lot of legacy systems and a lot of legacy thinking processes. People have been in the business 30, sometimes even 40 years. That's a lot of
Mhm.
change. Like, I could still deliver significant improvement to the business, but the amount of energy that takes to change. If you put people in there that are sprinters, they will burn out quickly. You get unhappy people, high turnover, high recruitment costs, all of those things that then distract you from being able to hit your long term goals.
Right. And in preparation for this episode, I think you shared a quote with me from Tony Hsieh. I think
Hsieh.
I messed up his last name, but he's the founder of Zappos.com and the author of Delivering Happiness. And in the quote that you shared with me, he said, good business generate missions to drive their profits. Great businesses generate profits to drive their missions. How do you think about this in context of what you just explained?
I mean, Tony Hsieh, rest in peace. He is a wonderful human who unfortunately we lost a couple of years ago. But yes, he was the founder of Zappos.com, which is a little bit like Amazon, but for shoes in the US. Now, his book, Delivering Happiness, if you haven't read it, it is fantastic. It is all about the ethos of putting the customer first and then doing right by your businesses. So he very much is somebody who has inspired a lot of my values and principles when it comes to business. But for me, good businesses generate missions to drive their profits. That is, kind of the baseline. But when you generate profits to drive your missions, that is actually how you're able to reinvest what you do back into achieving more. One of the things I absolutely love, got to see Tony speak a couple of times. And one of the stories that he told that just still sits with me today, he told his team that it does not matter whether or not we sell shoes. What we
Mhm.
actually do is deliver happiness. And so that means that whatever the customer asks you for, you need to help them find an answer. And he demonstrated this because by telling the story of how he was out with some industry people in Vegas one night and he rang up his customer service team and he was like, hey, he didn't say who he was. He just said, hi, I'm in Vegas and I'm trying to find the best steakhouse to take my friends to tonight. Can you help me? And yeah, they Googled, they found a few places, they told him, and he's like, that's amazing. Thank you. And then he went back the next day and he told them that it was him and that this was his story of how he had done that. But that was the culture that he wanted to bring to his team and his business and rewarded them for helping their customers, not necessarily on their sales targets. And I think being able to balance that, because when you have happy employees, they create happy customers, and those
Mhm.
then go on to remember you, have you as preference whenever they want to make that decision for purchase, and then you lead to happy shareholders. So
Mm.
kind of is all inspired from that. And I think for me, that being able to create your profits that you reinvest back into the things that you care about most, whether or not that is growing the business or if it is something more around the environment, whatever that mission is. I just think that it's a lovely way of looking at it.
Mm. And let's try to unpack this a little bit further to make it as practical as possible for our audience members. It starts with the purpose, the answering of the question, why is this business even here? What do we want to achieve in 10, 20, or 50 years? Do you have a framework or a mental model how business leaders can help the organization think through what this purpose could be?
Well, first of all, I like to talk about the fact that the purpose does not come from the boardroom. Um,
Mhm.
or if it does, like before you start that work, you should really validate your strategy and tactics with your customers. So, pure example of this was me working for a 24-year-old online only beauty company who decided to go into physical retail for the first time. So that decision came from the board. But what I did have control over was strategy and how to actually take that to market. So, like the radical thing that I did is I asked the customers, I ran a survey, we did focus groups, and we actually asked them, you know, why do you still go into stores? What are the things that you buy from other brands? Would you
Mhm.
shop online and unpack that? So again, that sort of stay curious component and asking those questions. But there's so many different ways that you can get data. We obviously have things like our Google Analytics, a
Mhm.
number of um, complaints, social media comments, so much data that we have in our businesses, even our error data around payment codes that didn't go through your checkout. Taking all of that information to actually start to unpack and understand that problem, validating that with customers, and then what I call an innovation rocket. It's not something that I've come up with. It's a model that I found online early in my career. But it's that kind of like model around shaping of a rocket, where once you start to have that clear vision of the problem, then you actually start to generate lots of ideas. You kind of like, what could be causing this? Once we've sort of understood a little bit more around, well, what is contributing to it? What are either like error messages, or we're getting a hotspot of data or feedback from this city or this category of products? How do we better understand and unpack that? We then generate a whole lot of ideas around what that could be. That for me might often be like a design thinking session, lots of post-it notes and Sharpies, like they are my love language when it comes to work. And what we would then do is try and synthesize that down to come up with some key hypotheses.
Mhm.
Um, that might then require talking to customers again or voting, getting people from different departments again, or customers helping us really land on what is the top 3 to 5 things that we think could be contributing to that. Then what we would do is build those ideas out into like a prototype or a potential solution. And then we would invite customers to come in and get their feedback on which of these they think actually solves that problem. And then that allows us to build out one or two and see what works in the real world. So that kind of idea of really starting with the synthesis of understanding all of the different information around it, ideating, narrowing it down, coming up with a few key things that you want to validate, and then test it and then build it, go from there. But they call it an innovation rocket, and it's a model that I really like to use.
And does this innovation rocket, from your perspective, directly lead to the idea of customer centricity, or is there something more that an organization would need to think about when they want to become a pure play, customer centric organization?
Look, I think the interesting part around being a customer centric organization is actually getting beyond the talk and making
Mhm.
sure the customer is actually bought into every conversation. Now, that for me can show up in multiple different ways, and a business needs to work out what does that look and feel like for them. One of the things that I love, I mean, Amazon is one of the great examples for this, where they created a concept of a red chair. And in a lot of their meeting rooms, they put an empty red chair. So it was a cognitive reminder to often refer to the customer and then use data points within that conversation to demonstrate what they think or what they need in that moment. We talk a lot about personas and things like that, but I think thinking about how that can actually come to life and your
Mhm.
business, whether or not that's even putting pictures of your persona customers on the wall or something like that that brings them to life. But more so than for me, what I found is really being able to have all of these different feedback mechanisms for getting um, really clear numbers or verbatims from our customers around what their problems are, and then creating sound bites. So we talk about customer journey maps and
Mhm.
these really complex diagrams user experience designers create. You put that in front of a board member and they just like information overload, they switch off. So I created just like this one simple slide. It's got 4 columns and it's just like, what are the top 5 problems in these 4 key stages of a retail experience? And then what are the opportunities? I put like customer journey on a page, just like here are the key things that customers have told us that are problems. This is what we're going to prioritize and this is what we're going to do about it. Keeping it simple when it comes to getting buy-in is really important, but also what it inadvertently did, creating these little snapshots, things like 4 out of 5 people who added things to bag didn't feel that there was enough product information for them to feel confident in completing
Mhm.
that purchase without seeing it in person. That, those little verbatim comments or vox pops, they became things that my boss then was able to bring up in board meetings and with his C-suite team members in advocating for getting us more funding. Those sort of things that he was confident in going to bat for us without me being in the room made my life so much easier is I could go and do the work while he then went and did the campaigning internally. It's great.
Mm. And your boss seeking additional funding for what you were building actually moves our conversation into an interesting direction. So when you, as an organization or as a team within the organization, if you're trying to employ this human focused approach to business, where putting customers first and employees at the center, where you argue, yes, maybe this ultimately benefits shareholders. I think especially these days that this kind of challenges the traditional Milton Friedman domain, where the view is that shareholder value is the primary responsibility of business. So, in the situation where your boss was in, how do you make the business case to skeptical boards or investors that a human focused approach does ultimately benefit shareholders?
It's an interesting one because I don't necessarily disagree with Friedman because you can still achieve the same outcome. My key thing around selling this as boards is not telling them that you're taking a human centric view of the world because you can still deliver the shareholder value by doing it. I just firmly believe that you get better outcomes by being human centered. The key thing is that the people who are making those decisions often do not believe that because that's not been their experience, or maybe they have never tried that way. So what I do is that I start human centered. I then figure out the business benefits. I wrap them up a nice present that looks like it is come at it from a shareholder value perspective, but I'm the one that's done all the work underneath that to know that I have come at it from a perspective that I feel comfortable putting my name and my reputation to, that I can deliver these business benefits because it's going to tick all of these other boxes. Because again, if the humans in my business, the employees, have bought into the ethos to this change in culture, process, technology, whatever we are doing, they are going to be happier around how that is then rolled out to customers. They're going to tell customers to get on board, for example, and use the app or join the loyalty program because the employees believe in it. And customers are going to believe other humans like them, like the employee. Also, then they're going to believe some flashy marketing TV um, ad or anything like that. So it's building it from the ground up in a way that means that I feel confident putting my name and reputation to something in front of the board going, I can deliver you a 10 times ROI or more on this initiative. It's just a different way of approaching something and a way that for me feels aligned with my values and how I want to show up in the world, but also gives me the comfort to be able to put my reputation on the line for some of the big bets I've done in my career.
Hmm. So I'm hearing it's not necessarily either or, it can be a combination of both.
Well, it's more that I believe that if you are taking it from a human centered perspective, you will always deliver great customer outcomes. It gives me the confidence, sorry, stakeholder outcomes, gives me the
Mhm.
confidence to be able to do that. So I can still wrap it up in a way that allows some of the more traditional or old school ways of thinking that this is the story that they are getting. So it's,
Right.
yeah.
And when I think about this on a timeline perspective, I mean, we had the discussion quarterly versus longer term planning and long term organizational success. Is there a difference in terms of timelines when you have a human centered approach to get sustainable business results versus pushing it through with old school or more traditional business methods? Do they move differently on the timeline?
They can do, but I think this is where it becomes quite interesting. So you take, for example, agile development, design, ways of working, whether or not you're actually a Spotify model where you've
Mhm.
formed your entire business to working more in squads, or you're working with just a development team. That's still working on quarterly cycles. The key thing here is that what we have done is taken a huge amount of customer research and information to understand and then monitor the shifting of those customer pain points and technology over time. What that allows us to do, even on a weekly basis, that we would be reviewing that data coming back in from customers. And if we saw something that came out of the blue and like a customer satisfaction really crashed, or if we saw a real spike in negative comments about something, we could then interrogate that and go, do we think that this was a once off flash? Because somebody put a Barbie house on the front page of a catalog and we only had 50 units to sell it online and it was sold out within 2 minutes. That's why customers were unhappy. Or did we actually have an outage where, our credit card payment gateway was out for 2 hours, which also impacted something? Or is it something that is broken down with a process where click and collect orders are now 90% out of stock because the orders aren't syncing fast enough to store it for us to get the stock off the shelves before it's sold? What that allows us to do is then be able to categorize those things and go, hey, it's an operational issue, let that team know. Or actually, it's a fundamental technology issue. Is that a problem that it's going to cause us a problem ongoing, um, like at a low level? Or is it like a risk, like a payment gateway going down, just need a risk adjustment? Whereas if it was something more significant, like we were being able to short pick or write down 90% of a click and collect order, that is urgent. That then needs to be brought in straight away into a development pipeline and fixed that week. Everything else can go into a backlog. And every quarter, when we go through our planning, it goes and gets picked up and prioritized against everything else that needs to be delivered. But what I was able to do is, knowing that we had all those processes in place, I can then go and be very confident that the numbers that I was signing up to each
Mhm.
year, I knew was achievable. But I also knew that I had the funding to be able to deliver that change. And I think that is kind of like a little bit of the balancing act. I'm very, very good at being able to say, if you don't give me this money, I can't deliver this growth. If you want this growth, I need this much money. And that comes with a little bit of experience and time, but
Mhm.
it ruthless prioritization and knowing where the value comes from. So if you know that you have the most pain here and you can see the value drivers and how the maths, if you like, adds up to this part of your customer journey, then you know that you invest here, you're going to be able to increase your value drivers. And it's just, again, it's all a game of maths. And I will tell you one thing that I laugh about. I was always good at maths, but I hated it. I was always like, I can never understand why maths is so important. When I was at school, I use maths every day what I do for work. And I'm so grateful that it was just something that worked in my brain.
And Nicola, let's maybe make this even more practical and talk about the practical application of the frameworks that you've explained. So assume a hypothetical situation, assume that you're speaking to a business leader who knows that they should be thinking longer term, but they may feel overwhelmed by quarterly pressures. I mean, especially in the startup world as an example. And some of our audience members, they originate from this environment where you have short-term investor requirements and the business has to show results. And still, long-term planning is important and having that vision. So what's your advice? Like, what should these individuals be doing this week to start building long-term thinking into their decision making?
Well, I think the best thing I can say again is talking to your customers. If you understand what is their major problem that they are trying to solve, you can prioritize those features or functions within whatever you are building for your proposition that will add the most value to them quickly. Because the sooner that they can see and derive value from your product, the quicker they become advocates, and then the more people that they will tell. So I think that value
Mhm.
driven approach to make your customers happy, like Tony Hsieh said, will then create that halo effect that then turns into them telling other customers. We definitely know that, an unhappy customer will tell 10 people, but even if you can get your happy customers to tell one people and that keeps your marketing costs down, I think that's really helpful. The other thing I would caution, because I do spend a bit of time with
Mhm.
startups. I mean, I have been pitched so many times in my career for what I do, let alone then the actual work that I do working directly with advisory for certain businesses. There is a real challenge, I think, around what I call vaporware, which is you get a lot of startups who sell a dream, they try and land the clients, they try and get the revenue in before they've actually developed and built a product that can actually deliver that value. I think the real risk of doing that, if you are not transparent, if you are not having those upfront conversations around, well, this is the vision, this is what it can do today, I'm going to figure that out pretty quickly. And then the trust is gone. And if I don't trust you, I'm going to tell everybody. I'm going to tell everybody what you've done to my business. You've taken my money. And that is going to be far more painful than if you were actually honest with me and saying, look, we're only in our beta phase. We're looking for, angel clients that are going to come on board. We're going to give you an amazing deal. If you sign up with us for 2 years, help us co-develop the product. I'm in for that. Like, there are people like me who want to help you develop the product. A, because you help me get into the market faster for something. You get to prioritize the things that I want that help me fix my business, and I get it for a great price. I mean, that's a win-win. And I think, we think back even to some of our negotiations courses. There's so much opportunity in business for win-win. And this is again, sort of, I guess, comes back to some of my approaches around being human centered and how you can do both. And I think that ability for everybody in your ecosystem to benefit from what you're doing, those opportunities exist everywhere. But it takes being a little bit brave, a little bit curious, and having those conversations and being transparent up front.
Mm. And what you explained last, at least superficially, sounds to me a little bit like a contradiction to some of the general startup wisdom and startup advice where you say, okay, just build an MVP, get it to the market as quick as possible and build a nice marketing story and nice headline messages around this to, have consumers adopt it early on and then just pivot. And I'm hearing from what you're saying that this may actually lead, if executed in the wrong way, possibly in a deceptive way, that this can just destroy your reputation in the market. Did I understand this correctly?
Completely. I think if you're not clear and upfront that it's an MVP or that, these are the things that it does automatically, like the amount of people that pitch me AI, I'm like, that's not AI. That is in the background doing a few things because it's taking, 4 hours to turn something around. That's not even automation right now. I know that it's your MVP and that you're building something in the background that it's learning from and it eventually will do that. But the key thing is here, I'm not scared of that. I'm happy to work with you and build that out. If I see that you are a smart person with a great track record and that you can visualize where you're going and sell me on the dream and tell me how you're going to get there in a way that I can trust you, that we will do that together, that you're not just here for yourself, for your ego, or to build your own business. If it is mutual benefit, I'm here for that story. And I think that is an interesting concept. And I recognize that from the work that I've done around the world, I do think that Australia and New Zealand, we are, because we're a smaller market, we
Hmm.
do a relationship-based economy. So most of my technology vendors, I know them, been out for drinks with them. They've worked at multiple companies. I've worked at multiple retailers. Now, there are some people who have completely screwed me over, sold me the dream, taken their, bonus checks and then disappeared and left me with a real mess that I've had to carry that's impacted my bonuses, my team's reputation, and my ability to be able to deliver the outcomes for my shareholders. Now, that comes back and bites you in this market because that person, no matter what company they go from, I'm never going to buy them from them again. And that is something that we do see over and over. So I appreciate that I may lend myself far more to that kind of relationship style of working. But I do think that there is great value when you can collaborate because, so for example, I've got a friend that I met through an industry. He's created a startup. I actually invested in his startup because I loved how smart he was. I loved the fact that the problems he was able to articulate that our customers and that I was having without even talking to me because he knew the industry and the problems he wanted to solve. I'm like, that is a smart man. That is somebody I want to work with. So I am now grateful because I have worked with them in a number of businesses where I've been the client. I'm also then the shareholder and the investor. And I think that ability for us to be able to coexist and both win-win has been a fantastic example.
Do you want to give shout outs to your friend's startup?
Sure. It's a company called Browse, Brauz, retail tech startup out of Australia, doing some interesting things at international, about to do a raise, I think, which is really exciting. But yes, just really smart, operating at a mid-level for retailers and works really well with Shopify. So simple, easy to get up and running. It's one of those people that you actually feel like you found a real partner who wants you to do well. Because if you do well, they do well. And I think that is what good business looks like.
Mhm. Nicola, I'm interested in some of your, well, personal reflection, and you just hinted towards in what you explained, where you've also worked with partners that turned out to be not as trustworthy as you has hoped them to be. When we think more broadly about mistakes that happen along the way, I carry the belief that we learn the most from failures and from things that didn't go well or didn't go to plan. What were some of the learnings that you had over your 24-year career from mistakes or failures?
It's interesting because I tend not to think about them as mistakes. I think the only mistake you have is one you didn't learn from. And I
Mhm.
think I'm grateful for is that introspection and always to be able to find a learning, whether or not it's in my personal space or my workspace. I think one of the key things that really does stick with me, particularly from my early days, is actually not trusting my own instincts. And I remember I was in this one job and I had a 6 month, what we call probation period over the side of the world, where you sort of only have a week's notice on either side if it's not really working out. Now, the job was definitely not what I expected. It was quite a toxic environment. My boss was quite difficult to work with. Lots of things that were just really hard. And I remember sitting there going, do I quit and walk away now, or am I going to stick it out? And it was kind of like this sort of story that, brought up, we're not quitters, it's something that I've just got to do and stick it out. And I look back and there's so much of me that was kind of like, if I could talk to myself back then, I would have given myself the permission to go, you know what, you've seen the red flags, listen to your gut, step out of this now. But in the same respects, I also know that I learned a lot in that job. It was one of the hardest things that I ever have done. Um, but I've also made some of my best work friends from that job.
Mhm.
We talk about it was forged in fire and 12 years on. Just last week, we were out for Christmas lunch and drinks. And even if we only catch up once or twice a year, like it is just one of those groups of people that uh, I know that are always going to be there for me. They're the only people that will ever understand that time in my career. But the other thing I would kind of say is that learning to find my voice and not be told that I'm too much, that I'm too emotional, um, those kind of really personal things that can take the passion or drive out of you in a way that makes you dim your light and be smaller and be more palatable to other people. I think what actually, going to Oxford was one of those moments for me where I actually went, you know, I am going to shine bright. I am going to let everybody in the world know that I can go to Oxford and I will. I'm not just going to
Yeah.
accept that I'm going to go to a local university because that's what people sort of feel is far more appropriate. So I think that's the other thing for me. You may not be palatable to everyone. I think there's a great quote about something like, you may not be everybody's cup of tea, because you are too strong, or because you're champagne, something like that. But I think that was the key thing that I would say is that wish that I had found that inner strength and conviction in myself to be able to not dull myself down for the people around me, to find those ways to be able to not be blunt and brash, but be able to communicate in a way that allowed me to still be myself or have the confidence of going, if it's not okay to be myself here, then I can find somewhere else that I do fit in. So I think that's also why some of my human-centered design
Mhm.
or values comes around creating cultures that allow people to be themselves and be able to bring out themselves to work, because so much around what we do, we are still consumers as well as we are business people. And being able to bring that to work, being able to show up, be authentic, and actually bring that diversity of thought from ourselves as individuals, not just as people we have to be in our jobs. And has been the biggest joy for me, and actually seeing my teams, people part of like take my area of responsibility, but allowing them to flourish
Mhm.
and them be able to grow in a way that I couldn't when I was in corporate jobs for a while.
I'm not saying that I'm sharing this belief, but some people may say that, okay, we're in an era where authenticity can sometimes be seen as a weakness, especially for women leaders. Some may argue. These people, they may question balancing being genuine with being commercially effective. What would you say to these people?
I think it's a really hard one because so much of it is actually down to partially the delivery and partially the people that receive that information. So I think what I've really learned, taken away, is more around when I was uncomfortable delivering my truth, I then would tend to come across a little bit more abrupt or brash,
Uh-huh.
right? And the problem is that when I was uncomfortable, it never landed well. So the more that I have become comfortable being able to communicate articulately, succinctly, my views and be able to back them up with numbers, then I've actually taken some emotion out of it, but more so in the delivery of the information, not in the actual information itself. And I think that for me personally, seeing Jacinta Ardern, our Prime Minister of New Zealand, and her
Uh-huh.
being able to lead authentically and empathetically, her ability to handle crisis um, from a human perspective, particularly when we had a massacre in Christchurch, we had massive earthquakes, lots, and even how she handled COVID. She is a real inspiration in being able to demonstrate how authentic, empathetic leadership can actually drive real change and connection. I do also feel from my own experience that if you really want to inspire a team, if you want to bring them behind what you are trying to achieve, you actually have to tap into their humanity. You actually have to help them connect personally, not just financially, to those outcomes. And if you
Mhm.
can bring it back to, so when I was at Jetstar, it's a low value airline, so like Ryanair or something like that. Most people are like, why on earth do you want to go and work for them? They are awful. But what they actually talked about in terms of their vision and what they were there to achieve, they were there to help more people travel to more places that they never ever thought that they could afford to visit in their lifetime. And what I took back to that at the time, I was like, my sister is a single mum. She's got two young boys. They live in Western Australia. They are 8 hours flight away from where we grew up, from our home, from our culture, and our history. Like six generations of New Zealanders. And
Mhm.
I was
Mhm.
like, it's from Jetstar that she was able to afford to take them home and to show them where we grew up. Now, that kind of emotional connection and being able to phrase that to somebody and say, look, I know it's really hard. And I know that our customers get really short with us when things go wrong. But when things go right, think about why we exist. Think about what we can actually do to help these people have a better life. I didn't get on a plane internationally till I was 18 growing up in New Zealand because international travel was just so inaccessible to us. But the likes of Ryanair, the likes of EasyJet and Jetstar, what they're able to do today is amazing. So if you can find that passion, you can find that humanity and you can find that connection, that's authenticity, that's leadership, and that is that connecting. Yes, this is why we work longer hours sometimes. This is why we do what we do. It's not just about keeping the rich people getting richer because that doesn't inspire them, that doesn't drive them. You've got to bring both.
That is very powerful advice, and I don't think anyone has explained it to me in this clarity. So thank you for this. And then, Nicola, being conscious of time a little bit, let's start wrapping our interview up. And we have a closing tradition on this podcast. And I'd like to ask you, what or who is inspiring you right now? Is there a particular leader, a book, an idea, a challenge, or something else that is expanding your thinking at the moment?
I mean, Jacinda Ardern, she's got her new documentary out called Prime Minister at the moment. I haven't got
Mhm.
to see it yet, but she's been doing the rounds and doing some of the talk shows. She's amazing. So if you get a chance, please go and see that. I
Sorry, what's the name again?
uh, Prime Minister. It's a
Oh,
document Prime Minister.
just a documentary called Prime Minister. Okay, yeah.
About
Mhm.
just Ardern's time and as Prime Minister of New Zealand. So
Mhm.
definitely one to go and see. I am, as I mentioned, a fan of Tony Hsieh and his book,
Mhm.
Bring Happiness. I also have a book that I call, that I get everybody that I work with to read. And it's an old, though. It's called Don't Make Me Think by a guy called Steve Krug. And it's a basic introduction to usability, but it's really about thinking around how customers use websites and how they actually approach information. Things like how they skim read and how they read like an F shapes and how then you design from a customer perspective and how they interact with screens and how it's different to print. But in terms of leadership, Simon Sinek is always one of my favorites. Brene Brown, absolutely obsessed with her. Um, I've been watching a lot of Stephen Bartlett, Diary of CEO.
Mhm. Yeah.
I think what's fascinating about him, given that where he started from that podcast to where he's then gone, it was all sort of about him. But now he's out there going into a whole heap of topics that he's not really ventured into before. And the most fascinating one for me recently is with one of my last people on my list, um, a lady called Dr. Mary Claire. So he actually did like a round table. I think it was of 5 women who are experts in perimenopause and menopause. And the fact that as a male, he hosted like nearly a 3-hour conversation with these absolute powerhouse women and spoke about really heavily scientific based information that turned so much of like what even women, let alone men, understand on this topic on its head is amazing. And then how does that relate to business and the workplace? And then as humans, how do we need to understand this better in order to create equality and better outcomes for everybody? I think they are really powerful conversations that are happening. And I think that's really exciting.
And from the leaders and books that you mentioned, or in general, do you have a favorite quote?
Oh, that one's putting me on the spot. Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I might have to come back to you on that one. Sorry.
Perhaps. And well, I'm just asking because sometimes we have this when we think about, okay, the things that are inspiring us. And I told you my favorite quote earlier today, or at least one of my most favorite quote, which is opportunity dances with those on the dance floor. And I believe sometimes we have this, that something just is so close to us, and just we carry it around with us as we go through our careers.
Yes. Like it's one of those things that I pull them out of my head from time to time, but it's one of those moments at the moment. Just like
And Nicola, if our listeners remember just one thing from our conversation, one insight, one way of thinking differently, or one action that they should take, what would you want that to be?
I think that you can't really be effective in business without being genuine, because I think if you really want to inspire, if you really want to connect, if you really want to motivate, people will see through where when you are being disingenuous. They will understand that there is something wrong, that they are not connecting. And I think that translates so much through an entire business. So the more you can show up, the more that you can be clear on the motivations and what you are trying to achieve and why, then the more likely you are to be able to get people on board and create momentum towards what you are trying to achieve. And I would say, however, that sometimes you do have to say to your team, I know this doesn't seem like it aligns to what we're trying to do in the longer term, but this is what we have to do right now to keep the business afloat. I had to do that a number of times, but I do think that the more you are genuine, the more that they will understand and then go, you know what? I believe in you. I believe that this is what we need to do, and I'm going to get behind this, even though I'm uncomfortable with it, because I know at the end of the day, we're all aligned to achieving those long term goals that we're here to do.
Nicola, these were some powerful final reflections and last words. Thank you very much for coming on to the show and for this conversation, and well, a good rest of your day.
Thanks for having me.
Before we wrap up, let me highlight what I believe are the true masterclass level insights from this conversation with Nicola. What strikes me most about our conversation is how Nicola flips the fundamental tension between profit and purpose. Some leaders may think that they have to choose, either chase shareholder value at the expense of everything else, or prioritize people and employees and hope the profit will follow. Nicola doesn't accept that choice. She leads human first. She builds business cases around that approach, and she consistently delivers both profit and mission. The second thing that really landed for me is her framework for long-term thinking. When most businesses are locked into quarterly cycles, Nicola talks about the horizon. She doesn't pretend to know what happens in 50 years, but she designs today's decisions so they compound towards something durable. She doesn't run a marathon at a sprint pace. And when she leads teams, she's crystal clear about whether they are sprinting towards a 3-year exit or building something that lasts decades. That clarity changes everything. What really fascinated me was her honesty about the gap between authenticity and being commercially effective. She's watched authentic, empathetic leaders actually drive real change. She gave us examples, including the founder of Zappos.com, and she has experienced the opposite in her own life. She experienced workplaces where you dim your light to fit in. Her insight was sharp. Authenticity isn't weakness, but the delivery matters. It's not about being blunt or brash. It's rather about being clear, backing your views with data, and helping people connect personally, not just financially, to what you're trying to achieve. And perhaps most important, you can't be effective in business without being genuine. People see through inauthenticity. They understand when something is off. And if they don't trust you, they won't follow. But if they do trust you, if they know you're clear on your motivations and why you're asking them to do hard things, they will get behind you, even for uncomfortable situations and even for uncomfortable short moves, because they know you are aligned with them on the long-term goal. Now, a few final words. If this conversation resonated with you, whether you're a leader wrestling with quarterly pressure while trying to build something that lasts, or a founder trying to figure out when to be transparent about your MVP versus overselling the vision, or whether you're simply inspired by Nicola's approach to authentic leadership, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. You can also head over to businessunbound.co. That's our website, and you'll find links to everything we discussed. You can also connect with Nicola directly via our website. We'll make sure to link her social profiles. And while you're on our website, subscribe to our newsletter so that you will be the first to know when new episodes drop. We are building a community of leaders who think in decades, not quarters, and who know that the best way to win is to show up genuinely. Now, thanks for listening. This was Business Unbound for today, and until next time.